Hi, I'm Amy from the Kids Corner, and today we're going to take our old used paper and make paper clay mice. All right, to make our paper clay mice, you're going to need some paper. You can use any paper that's been written on that you have. Some water, some salt, some flour, a blender, some sort of strainer, or even a cloth. I use both when I do it. And then something to dry your mice on. So we're gonna start by adding some water and paper to our blender. Don't try to do too much at once because you don't want to stress out your blender. You're just going to blend until you see most of the paper is into small pieces. You can just pour your mixture into your strainer. Just get some of that water out. So once your mixture is still squishy, but not sopping wet, you can put it in a bowl. Just dump the water. And we're going to add some salt and some flour. You don't have to be very precise on this recipe, so I'm going to give you roundabout measurements. But the salt, all it does is it prevents any mold or bacteria from growing in as your clay is drying. And the flour makes it a bit of a more doughy texture, so it's easier to sculpt. So I added about just under a quarter cup of salt to my mixture and just under half a cup of flour. And then you mix it up until a dough forms. This is actually a really cheap way to make a Play-Doh-like thing for your kids. And I find when I do this with my kids, they don't usually end up making little animals and stuff. Often they're just playing with the dough, just like they would Play-Doh. And I should note, you can make this without the flour. The flour just makes it stick better, so it's easier for kids. Without the flour, it's easy for it to crumble while you're making it. But this little guy was made with just paper, no flour. There was some salt just to make sure it didn't mold. But so once it's mixed, it will look something like this. If you still find it's a little too wet, you can put it in a cloth and just squeeze out a little bit more water. And if you happen to squeeze out too much, then you can always add a little bit more. So you can see now I have a clay that holds together pretty well, but is still quite wet. If it's too dry, you'll find the paper will crumble. It needs to have some wetness to hold its shape. So now I'm gonna start forming my mouse. So I start with a small ball, and I just kind of play with it, squeezing out some of the water, keeping it in a ball. Then I put it down, and I'm just making kind of a teardrop shape. Now it looks best when there's a distinction between the head and the body, so I kind of start making a little head, and a little point for the nose. And that is my mouse shape. Now I'm going to want to add little dents to put the eyes in, little slots to glue the ears in, and a little hole to glue the tail in. So for that, I'll just cut a little piece of cardboard to make slots. I'll use the end of a paintbrush to make the holes. So I want the ears to be right where the head starts, where it starts getting skinnier for the head, and the eyes about there, and the tail right in the back. So you end up with your little guy with his two slots, his two eyes, and his little tail hole. Now you can either dry this out in the sun on a really nice day, or you can dry it in the oven on its lowest setting. So I just put it on my pan, and it takes about 2 or 3 days in full sun on a really hot day to dry, or a few hours, quite a few hours, probably about 10 hours to dry in the oven. Often I'll start it in the oven and then move it outside to finish. So once it's dry, you'll have something like this. You can see that the slots in the eyes holes, they close up a little bit as it dries, but you can still see that they're there. So we're going to use just regular school glue and any string you have for a tail, and any little piece of cardboard that a cereal box or anything will do to cut out the ears. So for the tail, if you have cord that's going to come undone like this one, you can see that it easily untwists. I'm just going to tie little knots just so that the tail stays in one cord. So one knot on the end to keep it together, and then I tie another knot where I'm going to glue it. It just helps give you something to glue on. So next we're going to cut out the ears and the tail and glue them on. So we'll start by cutting out some ear shapes. I'm just using a piece of a cereal box. And you just cut out a little nub and a little round. I'm cutting 2 at once so the ears look the same. And there's my little ears that my little guy's gonna have. Now just fill your little hole with just regular school glue. Put the ears in. And then we'll have to let that dry before we paint it. Now we're going to paint our mouse. So I'm going to show you a simple way to paint, but if you're doing this with small kids, just let them paint. They have way more creativity than we can teach them. I'm going to do a just simple brown and white mouse. And I just have a little bit of pink for his nose and his ears. With the brown mice, I like to have the bottom light and the top dark, and then inside the ears white. I'm going to mix up a color brown that I like for the top, and then I'm going to just paint him. It's good to have a lot of paint on your paintbrush because your paper clay has a lot of grooves and holes that you want to make sure you fill in. Once you have that, you can wipe off your paintbrush, give him a little time to dry. We're going to paint his belly. So I'm going to paint his belly white. I'm going to just go over the edges so that on the side you can see that white belly a little bit. Then I like to give him little cheeks, little white cheeks. Where his neck would be, I put the white up, and in between his legs a little bit, I put a little bump. Now I'm going to move to my small detail paintbrush, and I'm going to get a really light brown for inside his ears. And wipe off my paintbrush. I'm gonna, in his little eye, I'm gonna put a dark brown and just make a little circle. And then our last little touch is gonna be the little pink. So just a little nose, a little in his ear. So now our last step is to glue in his eyes. I'm just using little black seed beads. For my white mouse, I used red seed beads. So you just add a little glue in the hole and carefully put your bead in. I try to line up the holes in the beads to be like his pupils, so make sure they face the right way or else he ends up looking a little funny. But there's our finished mouse. Thank you for joining me for the craft today. Yeah, have a good day.